In the last lecture, or last part of the lecture, we looked at the common errors in surveys. Now, we're looking at true variation and error. See, the thing is, we can't always perhaps get rid of error. It's always going to crop up, but we have to minimize it. So most variables will contain an element of error, so that it is helpful to think of variation as made up of two components, true variation and error. That true variation is actually what we're interested in. We want to see what causes different people to have different views or for different things to happen. Okay, so in other words, variation equals true variation and variation due to error. And the aim is to keep that second component, right, that variation due to error, minimized. Because if we minimize that noise, we get to see what the true signal is, what is actually happening in the data. Right, and remember what validity is, okay? So reducing that error helps us to get a valid data on our topic, where validity is understood to be, are we asking the right question? Does our data measure what we are looking to measure? So variability can arise in two ways during the interview process. There's intra-interviewer variability. Now, whenever you see intra, you have to think about inside, okay? So intra means, does the interviewer change the way they interview people from one interview to another? So through time, the same interviewer changing the way they interview, and that will have an effect on the answers they get and the data they collect, okay? And that will increase your variation, your error, right? And there's inter-interviewer variability. So perhaps two different people ask questions in a different way, and that will create this variability, right? This increase the error, the noise in our data. So let's look at this with regard to closed and open questions. So open questions require sifting through lots of different variants and coding them so that you can perform some kind of quantitative analysis of the answers. For example, what percent replied in an optimistic fashion? Whereas closed questions are straightforward and require no extra coding. This also means there is less likelihood of error through interpretation. Okay, so now we're talking about after our interviews are done, we have to look at our transcripts and we have to start coding those transcripts so that we can create some data from them. Okay, so this is another area after the interview where we can increase the error and variability in our data. And as with the interviewing process, there are two main sources of coding error. There's intra-coder variability and there is inter-coder variability. And this means exactly what you probably think it means, right? Intra-coder variability means perhaps my mood changes throughout the day. And so the way I code interview answers also changes. And this creates noise or error and variability in my data. There's intercoder variability, so perhaps I see something as optimistic, whereas Isaac sees it as pessimistic, and now we have coded it differently. All right, so it's important to remember to stick to your script. So before you go interviewing people, you create a script with lots of questions, and you must stick to the same script so that every time when you go to different people, you're asking the questions in the same way and you're using the same words, okay? And that will decrease your variation and decrease the error in your results. You must also have a plan for data collection and data management. Okay, this is after the interview. Ensure you record the answers accurately and keep them organized so that the analysis is straightforward, or else you can introduce error or variation and variation. All right, so now we're going on to types of interview. I guess we know by now there are probably going to be 3 types of interview. And when you go through this, just try to think of, for your research projects, what kind of interviews you want to use. So the first is structured. The one that is most commonly employed in survey research. The goal of the structured interview is for the interviewing of respondents to be standardized so that differences between interviews in any research project are minimized, okay, using lots of closed questions. Then we get semi-structured interviews. Okay, typically refers to a context in which the interviewer has a series of questions that are in the general form or an interview schedule but is able to vary the sequence of questions. Also, the interviewer usually has some latitude to ask further questions in response to what are seen as significant replies. So perhaps your respondent gives an interesting facial expression when they are answering a closed question, and you all react by laughing or something. And now you can follow that cue by asking more probing questions. We'll come to probing and prompting later on, but the semi-structured interview allows you to follow those leads. Finally, unstructured interviews. The interviewer typically has only a list of topics or issues, often called an interview guide or aide memoire, that are to be covered. The style of interviewing is usually informal. The phrasing and sequencing of questions will vary from interview to interview. Okay, so unstructured interviews is very easy to do because you just kind of go at it. But remember, the difficulty with unstructured comes afterwards when you are recording lots of very long interviews and coding that information, okay, from those transcripts.